This is Seeking Delphi. I'm Mark Sackler. The future lives here. Thank you for joining me for episode number 15, Wearable Technology and the Future of Pregnancy. If you listened to my recent minicast from the annual Association of Professional Futurists meeting on what is a futurist, you'd understand that I personally sort futurists into two categories. One type of futurist studies possible futures and thinks, talks, and writes about them, while a distinctly different sort of futurist does something about it. They invent the future. Today's show focuses on one such special inventor of the future, the co-founder of Bloomlife. Eric D. is an engineer and entrepreneur who, along with his business partner, is inventing the future of pregnancy through what amounts to a fitness tracker for the unborn baby. Just exactly what does this device do? How is it developed? And most importantly, where does it fit in the future of both wearable health technology and the overall field of health informatics? I spoke to Eric recently to get his take on the matter.
Eric, welcome.
Thank you.
Eric, first of all, tell our listeners just a little bit, give us an idea who you are, your personal background, and how you got to where you are right now.
Sure. So as mentioned, I'm a co-founder and CEO of Bloomlife. My background is I have a PhD in biomedical engineering from UCLA. After finishing up my degree in 2008, I ended up working at a Belgian-based research institute called IMEC that made their name in the scaling of electronics and enabling many different sort of semiconductor technologies. And one of the large bodies of work they had there at the time was in healthcare, both in point-of-care devices such as next-gen sequencing, but also in the wearable space and finding new ways to leverage technologies to enable care outside of traditional healthcare settings. And so it's there that I met my co-founder, Julian Penders, who had built and led a team of about 35 engineers developing arguably the most advanced wearable devices for brain monitoring and cardiac monitoring and any other kind of monitoring you can imagine. And we were inspired to start a company when his wife got pregnant with her first child. And we just saw that there was a huge amount of unmet needs for expectant parents. And we decided there was an opportunity there to put new technology in the world to try to improve the health of moms and babies. So that's how we got started.
Tell us a little bit exactly about what this product is, what it does, and how is it different from what's previously been done?
Sure. So Bloomlife as a company, which is the same name we're calling the product, Bloomlife as a company is a women's health company that aims to design new solutions to advance the state of prenatal care, providing expectant moms and dads, for that matter, with better information on the health of the mom and the health of the baby throughout the pregnancy, and to aggregate data that will eventually help doctors earlier predict and manage pregnancy complications such as preterm birth. What the product specifically does is it's a lightweight patch that's worn on the belly, and we non-invasively track physiological health of the mom and the baby. We do so by measuring biopotentials in motion. And so we track the electrical activity of the baby's heart, the uterus, and the mom's heart, and the motion of both the mom and the baby. And through there, we could extract out with signal processing algorithms critical health parameters of maternal and fetal well-being, such as fetal movement, fetal heart rate, contractions, various aspects of maternal health, including activity, stress, sleep, all parameters that have been shown in medical research to be linked to birth outcomes.
How does this fit into the whole health informatics space? Is the data collected in some central point? Is it available to doctors in real time or in some sort of health database?
Yeah, so it's kind of a key question for this whole space for many different wearables. In fact, we had been working in the digital health domain for a number of years before we started Bloomlife, and we just saw that there was a lot of companies that were really struggling, or if they were finding early success, we feel like they would struggle at some point down the line. And I think Fitbit's a pretty good example of that. So essentially, what we have done is developed a medical device, but from a business strategy standpoint, are initially offering this to consumers. And there's two key points to this. One, when I say medical device, I mean that we are capturing clinically relevant parameters as accurately as what you would find in the hospital, which I think is particularly important in this world because it's about pregnant moms, and the information you provide needs to be accurate and reliable if a mom's going to rely on it to make decisions, since this is probably one of the most critical times of her life. But we start off with the consumer world because, as you're probably familiar, innovation in the medical space and adoption within the medical communities is historically extremely slow. And part of the challenges in the prenatal world is that it's been a very hard area to study. There really hasn't been any technology that's been in existence to track the health of women and babies longitudinally, and even more so, setting up these studies is really challenging because pregnant women are oftentimes excluded from studies. And so we started off in the consumer world because we felt it was the best way to essentially start collecting data. And it's that data that's absolutely critical for us, since it's going to allow us to establish a better understanding of what does a normal pregnancy actually look like, and what does an abnormal pregnancy look like, and can we actually earlier predict when that transition will happen, so it gives moms and doctors an opportunity to intervene at the right time. So today, to get to your question, it's being offered as a consumer product. We are and have run a number of clinical studies to demonstrate the accuracy and reliability, and we are now just starting to run studies to show the impact having this data could have on healthcare decision making. And it's at that point then we'll start to really transition to providing and serving this data up to doctors in some way, shape, or form, which, to be perfectly honest, isn't entirely defined yet.
Interesting. So I noticed recently an article mentioning the concern about all this wearable data kind of potentially being in the cloud in terms of the potential for privacy. Is that an issue you're looking ahead toward as you look toward maybe getting to that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a concern. There's many elements to privacy and data security, I think, that need to be considered. There's aspects related to just things such as HIPAA and who has access to the data, and how do you make sure that it's secured and de-identified, or it's only shared with the right people. There's issues of folks that you don't actually want to have access to the information, gaining it for potentially nefarious reasons. And I think there's also an element of who actually owns the data and what rights are being granted to any given party in terms of what people can do with that data, right? Whether or not companies such as Bloomlife, who collect information about a mom and her baby, have any rights to further monetize that data. We have taken a particular stance that we believe that users should own their data, and they have the right to opt in or opt out of any particular efforts that we want to do with that data, even if it's for completely, beneficial purposes, such as, trying to better understand early signs of fetal distress. If a mom really doesn't feel comfortable with her data being used that way, she should have perfectly the right to opt out of that. Or let's say she would have to opt in for us to include it, and otherwise she would be opted out. So there are things that we consider in many different facets. I think the element of data security for a lot of the health stuff, it feels like a lot of it is probably, the energy is probably better spent focused on making sure hospitals themselves are secure, since data coming off wearables is, I think, ultimately a lot less valuable than the data that's already inside hospitals today that's probably poorly protected.
Let's move on. You talked about the algorithms and there being so much data there. Where does artificial intelligence start to come in, either now or in the future? We keep hearing about artificial intelligence bots maybe not just assisting physicians in the future, maybe even replacing them, but in this space, do you see artificial intelligence playing a role now or even greater in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that AI is very much a buzzword right now. Big data was kind of the buzzword that predated AI, and there is definitely a role to play. Key, though, is a few things that people oftentimes overlook in terms of the ability to leverage AI or neural networks or machine learning, for that matter, which essentially is really what AI is. And first and foremost, it's about having quality data. There's a saying, bad data in, bad data out, right? So making sure that the data that you're putting into these machine learning models and these AI engines is actually good, high quality data is absolutely critical to make sure that you're not just inputting a bunch of noise, because these systems are designed to come up with some answer. It's just, does that answer have any meaning? And so we spend a lot of time making sure that we know when when data we're collecting is accurate and when it's not accurate, or let's call it reliable and non-reliable, since there's no wearable device in the world really that accurately captures data all the time. And so making sure you could actually tag the data so that the AI engines and the machine learning engines actually know what data they could trust is important. So I think that's one critical element that, again, oftentimes people overlook. Another element that is critical is an outcome that you're measuring against. Just collecting a whole bunch of data but not actually knowing what the outcome was really doesn't do you any good. You essentially want to train these models to identify patterns that lead to some specific outcome, and then see, of the massive information, all the variable inputs you could have, which ones are the ones that have an overarching effect on the outcome. That's really the key. And so I think for us, we do apply machine learning in a few places. We actually do apply, and I think I am not really familiar with anyone doing this at this point, is applying machine learning models to low-level signal processing algorithms. That's something that we have some IP around. And then the data we collect out on a more population level, we're looking to see, can we identify patterns that could be indicative of things such as labor? And can we remotely detect labor just by looking at physiological changes, which today is not possible. You're actually looking at contractions combined with a cervical dilation, so it's actually a clinical exam you need. So for sure, I think there's a near-term opportunity to apply AI to start understanding patterns and to come up with algorithms that can help us identify biomarkers, let's call it, for some specific outcome. And then from there, of course, there's the question of, do these things ever start replacing doctors? I don't know if I really believe in that. I think ultimately they could feasibly be more of companions to help process huge amounts of data that humans probably aren't well equipped to do, and really serve up to doctors all the information they would need in a much more simple format than just whatever the mind could actually recall. So I think I really see it more so that they'll likely live hand in hand, and one will help facilitate the work of the other rather than full-on replacement, at least in my view.
It looks like that predictive modeling is starting to work into this, and I'm wondering, how is that working out so far, and how do you expect that to move forward?
Yeah, so I'm proud to say that we have already published our first paper on this, on the ability to detect labor remotely, which I said currently is not possible. And that was done using machine learning models that leveraged both data coming from a more controlled setting in a hospital, as well as data that came from our patients, our consumers. And through there, we've been able to develop an algorithm that has about 70% accuracy in detecting labor remotely, which doesn't sound that great yet. But I mean, again, as a starting point, given where we're at, it's actually pretty impressive. And the more data we get, the more accurate that model ultimately becomes. So we're already seeing some good traction there. And there's many opportunities to apply these kind of machine learning approaches within the prenatal space, in particular because, as opposed to something like neurodegenerative diseases or cardiac disease, which ultimately may take years, if not decades, to fully develop, within pregnancy, you get an outcome every 9 months. The baby's going to be born one way or another. And so it really provides a pretty quick learning cycle for some of these models with a very clear outcome that could be measured and then used to train the model. So yeah, we're already seeing some traction there, and we're excited to see what we can do with these approaches as we collect more data and have more patients online.
Let's take a look out, say, 10 or 15 years now. Where do you see this whole wearable space going? Technology advancing very rapidly, artificial intelligence and health informatics space advancing rapidly. Where will it be in, say, 2030 or so?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I said, we've been part of this space really from its onset, and I think there was a lot of hype initially over what these technologies could do. And I think the hype bubble is, I think, as as they say in the Gartner innovation curve, I think we're definitely the trough of disillusionment right now for wearables. I think a lot of people said, well, they didn't really turn out very well. Nothing really happened. I mean, look at Fitbit, right? I mean, they're not really doing anything. Their stock's down, and how is that? Is this all these things are meant to be? And I think, again, fundamentally, the ideas were correct over what the opportunities are for these technologies. I think the time scale was off, and it just takes a long time to both, a wearable is a device. Devices take inevitably longer periods of time to develop than a piece of software and commercialize. And even once you get them commercialized, it takes a lot more time to actually aggregate the data with the relevant outcome to start training these models to leveraging the data to become predictive of something. So I'm very bullish on where these things are going. Ultimately, I think in the next 10 to 15 years, what you'll see is a transition from consumer gadgets into more medical device or medical grade type devices. So moving beyond, just kind of things that, steps into heart rate variability, really looking at EEG patterns in brain, looking at fetal heart rate, fetal movement, really looking, blood pressure more continuously. And you're going to start seeing more clinically relevant parameters collected. And as these devices find homes in the world, likely in more niches of the market rather than in broad-based consumer applications, you're going to start getting more data online. And really, once this data starts to get amassed, this accurate data, this clinically relevant data, and as we start to link that to outcomes, you will start having the ability to essentially establish a greater understanding over what does health look like for any given population or population group or individual. And ultimately that will help stratify people into categories for care, increase the accuracy and the effectiveness of care that is delivered to any given individual. And ultimately we'll get to a point where we do have the knowledge of how one particular aspect of your life affects everything else. It's just, again, it's going to take some time. It's going to take more data. It's going to take accurate, reliable data, and it's going to take some studies to move beyond just consumer interesting inferences to really randomized control trials with clinical outcomes being measured to make sure that ultimately these things get adopted within healthcare systems. So I think we're still have some years to go. I think the keys are, as mentioned, having devices that are clinical grade or medical grade, having sufficient amount of data online with outcomes, having prospective clinical studies that prove out any kind of diagnostic algorithm that comes from this data. And then ultimately, of course, the last part is the regulatory aspect of being able to show out and go through the necessary regulatory clearances so that the healthcare system ultimately feels comfortable embracing and adopting these things within day-to-day medical practice. So I think that the time frame you mentioned, as sad as it is for someone like myself working in this space, is probably more along the lines of 10 years than in 2 or 3 years.
For one final line of questioning, Eric, I'm going to call up something that's kind of important to me as a futurist that I'm focusing on in this series, and that's those people who are inventing the future. We think about some big names that do that, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, whatever, but you're doing that in your own niche, and you recently won a competition against a lot of other people who are doing it. Tell us about that contest.
Yeah, so last year we had the opportunity to participate in a global startup competition called the Extreme Tech Challenge, which was a startup event. I think there was about 1,300 companies that applied into this, and we ended up getting chosen as the top 3 in this event, which out in Vegas at CES, which offered us an opportunity to go and travel down to Necker Island to go meet with Richard Branson amongst several other judges there and to pitch them on our ideas. And through that competition, we ended up winning and getting a chance to again spend some time with Sir Richard and getting feedback on what we're working on and his thoughts on the opportunities that each one of our companies presented. And it was definitely the best business trip I've ever been on, quite possibly the best I'll ever go on. So yeah, it was an exciting time, and it's just great to kind of hear the words of encouragement that come from someone like Richard, who has accomplished so much, and again, as you said, is a visionary in terms of what he's doing right now with Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, I got to ask, what is he like in person?
He is one of the most down-to-earth individuals I've ever met. He's extremely present, which I think is something that all of us probably could be better at. He when he talks to you, he's really dialed in on what you're talking about. I never saw him once on a cell phone. He carries around a little notebook with a pen, and he writes down notes when things interest him. And, at this event, there were several hundred people there. And when you're talking to him, though, he's really just kind of paying attention to you. So he's extremely friendly, down to earth, very approachable. He's a joker. He kind of likes to play practical jokes on people and then kind of give people a hard time on that. But yeah, really just a brilliant, genuine guy. And you can see why he's been so successful in his career.
That is absolutely fantastic. Eric, thank you so much for your time, and best of luck going forward with Bloomlife.
Thanks so much, Mark.
After listening to Eric, I look at the Fitbit on my wrist and think, how quaint. Bloomlife is beating a path to a healthier future, not just for mothers and their unborn babies, but eventually for all of us. I can see why Richard Branson was impressed. In the news recently, human longevity continues to be a hot topic in the future of humanity. FeedingAmerica.org reports that the current rate of hunger among senior citizens in the U.S., which they currently peg at 1 in 12, will increase by 50% by 2025, shortly after the youngest of baby boomers pass the age of 60. Meanwhile, a report from the Journal of Population Aging states that we are just 3 years away from a demographic milestone that was unthinkable only a few decades ago. The global population over age 65 will surpass the global population under age 5. The report also states that within a decade, over half the population of Europe will be over 50, and that by the end of the century, there could be as many as 1.5 million centenarians in England alone. And aging research, what it is and how to slow, stop, or even reverse it, continues to accelerate. An enterprise called the Longevity Fund closed on $22 million in venture capital that it intends to pump into early-stage companies researching the causes of aging and possible means of extension of healthy lifespan. The fund's originator certainly is taking the long view. Laura Deming is just 23 years old. On the technology front, a report issued by research group Gartner Incorporated foresees multiple self-driving vehicles hitting the automotive market by 2020, but does not project them to make significant impacts on transportation until at least 2025. The main problem for the delay might be found in another finding from the study. A survey finds that fully 55% of the population say they would not currently ride in a fully autonomous vehicle. And finally, a company in Guangzhou, China, got itself into the news with a most unusual publicity stunt. They lined up a brigade of 1,069 miniature robots dancing in unison. Funny or creepy? Either way, I doubt the Rockettes are losing any sleep over this. The YouTube video of the dancing robots, along with the links to all stories related to this program, are available at www.seekingdelphi.com. As always, your comments, questions, and suggestions for future content are always appreciated. Special thanks to my guest, Eric D. My technical assistant is Mohammed Maroof. Until next time, I'm Mark Sackler.